Do you know what it feels like to hear your own children whisper that you won't make it past Christmas? To see them laugh at the very machine that keeps you breathing? I do, and I'll never forget it. My name is Frances Whitlow. I'm 72 years old, and this is my story. Before I begin, I'd like to know, where are you watching from? I always find comfort in hearing where people are listening, because sometimes, even in betrayal, we can find connection in each other's stories. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas. The dining room was dressed for the holiday the way it always had been: candles glowing, ham roasting in the oven, cranberry sauce in crystal bowls that had been in my family for generations. My oxygen tank hummed softly beside me, its rhythm familiar, almost like background music. I tried to focus on the warmth of the lights, the smell of cinnamon, the sight of snow falling lightly outside the window. But warmth only goes so far when the people around the table treat you like you're already in the grave. I sat at the end of the table, as I always did, while my two sons, their wives, and my daughter busied themselves with laughter and chatter. At first it seemed normal: the clinking of silverware, the passing of dishes, the occasional toast. I held my fork carefully, breathing slowly through the tube in my nose, trying not to let the tank hiss too loudly. Then I caught it: a sharp chuckle from my son, Greg. He leaned close to his wife, thinking I couldn't hear. "Don't bother buying Mum a gift next year. She won't be here by then." His wife, always quick to play along, snorted into her wine glass. "Finally, some room in the house once she's gone. Imagine how much easier things will be." I froze. My fork hovered above my plate, hand trembling just slightly. I didn't look up, didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing the sting land. But my ears, oh, my ears caught every syllable. Then my daughter chimed in, sweet-faced, always pretending to be the dutiful child. "At least the inheritance will clear by next Christmas. Might be the first holiday we can actually enjoy without all this." She gestured vaguely at me, at the tank, at the tubes. Laughter spilled around the table. Low at first, then louder, careless. It was like listening to a pack of wolves circling, waiting for the weakest to fall. I took a sip of water to steady my hand. My granddaughter, Emily, my one bright star, sat 2 chairs down. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and she whispered sharply, "Stop it. She can hear you." But Greg only waved her off. "She hears what she wants. Doesn't matter anyway." I turned my gaze down at the carved ham, its glaze shining under the chandelier. I thought of all the Christmases past, the years when I stayed up until dawn wrapping gifts, the times I worked double shifts to make sure they never went without. Flashback. I saw myself, years ago, achy widow at 45, standing in a cold kitchen with unpaid bills stacked high, telling myself I'd find a way. I always did. I packed lunches, paid tuition, patched clothes, and smiled through my own exhaustion. All for them. And this was what I earned in return: laughter at my oxygen tank, mockery of my lifespan. My chest tightened, not from illness, but from something sharper: betrayal. I looked at Emily then. Her small hand squeezed mine under the table. Her eyes, full of silent fire, said what no one else dared to say. "You matter." That was enough to stop me from crumbling in that moment. I raised my chin, forcing my breath to steady, and I let their cruel words slide over me as though they hadn't cut deep. Inside, though, something shifted. That night, as I sat alone in my room with the soft wheeze of the oxygen tank filling the silence, I replayed their voices, their laughter, the casual cruelty, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt resolved. If they thought I was a burden, if they thought my days were numbered, if they thought they could laugh at the woman who gave them everything, then they were about to learn what it meant to underestimate Frances Whitlow. I whispered into the quiet, "If they think I'm done, they're about to learn otherwise." And with that, the first spark of a plan began to burn inside me. The days after Christmas carried a silence that clung to me like frost on windows. The laughter of my children still echoed in my head, sharper than the hiss of my oxygen tank. Every time the machine exhaled beside me, I remembered their smirks, their words. "She won't be here by next year." It would have been easy, too easy, to let their voices sink me into despair, to shrink further into the chair where I spent most of my afternoons, staring at the television but seeing nothing. But grief and humiliation can do strange things to a woman. They can make her crumble, or they can sharpen her. For me, that night, it sharpened. I woke the next morning with the familiar tightness in my chest. The routine was always the same. Attach the tube, check the tank, make sure the flow was steady, and shuffle toward the kitchen for tea. It should have been a moment of fragility. But that morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink, I saw something different. My hair, silver and thin, was pulled back into a bun, my face lined with years of sacrifice. But my eyes, oh, they were alive again. There was steel in them, a glint I hadn't seen in years. I whispered to my reflection, "You're not done. Not yet." Still, my body reminded me of its limits. Every step across the kitchen floor carried weight. Every breath needed help. And yet, I remembered something my late husband, Walter, once told me before the sickness took him. He had taken my hand one quiet evening after a hard day's work, his voice low but steady. "Francis, promise me this. Never let them treat you like you're less than the mother who built their lives. You've carried too much to ever let anyone carry you like baggage." Those words had comforted me back then, in the early days of widowhood, when the bills were stacked high and the house was full of hungry mouths. But now, decades later, they came back with a new purpose. I realized I had been letting my children carry me as though I were a burden, not a foundation. And that had to change. That week, I had a doctor's appointment. My daughter was supposed to drive me, but she claimed she had plans with the girls. I took a cab instead, gripping the handle of my tank as the car jolted over potholes. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old magazines. When my name was called, I shuffled in, bracing myself for more bad news. But Dr. Miller surprised me. He looked at my charts, listened to my breathing, and said, "You're stable, Francis. Your condition isn't worsening. You may be limited, yes, but you've still got years ahead if you take care of yourself. Years. Not months. Not weeks. Years." My heart swelled. I thought of my children's smug faces at the Christmas table, their whispers that I wouldn't see another holiday. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile. I had time. Enough to do what needed to be done. That night, I sat with a notepad on my lap. The oxygen tank hummed beside me, but I hardly noticed it anymore. Instead, I wrote out names. I wrote out memories. I wrote out the sacrifices I had made. Each tuition payment, each medical bill, each meal cooked from nothing when money was short. And then, I wrote down the cruel words from Christmas. Each line felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of my patience. By the end of the night, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was justice. Balance. If they believed I was already gone, then I would act as though I were. I would tie up the loose ends of my life, not in their favor, but in truth's favor. The next morning, I called the only person I still trusted outside of Emily, my lawyer, Mr. Harper. He had handled Walter's estate when he passed, and I had known him for decades. His voice was steady on the phone. "Francis, it's been years. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath, the oxygen hissing as though punctuating my words. "I need to make some changes. Urgent ones." Quietly, he didn't question me. He simply asked, "When can you come in?" I answered without hesitation, "Tomorrow morning." That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight outside painting pale stripes across my blanket. My heart raced, not from illness, but from anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me that was stronger than fear. Resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I was fading. But tomorrow, I would begin proving them wrong. The following morning, the sky was a dull grey, clouds hanging low as though they knew secrets were about to be buried. I rose early, pulled on my warmest wool coat, and carefully adjusted the strap that held my oxygen tank steady at my side. My breath rattled softly through the nasal cannula, but for once, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like a drumbeat, pushing me forward. The cab ride to Mr. Harper's office felt longer than usual. Every bump in the road reminded me how fragile my body had become. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I clutched my handbag close, where I had tucked documents, account statements, and the last letter Walter ever wrote me. It wasn't evidence. It was armor. When I stepped into Mr. Harper's office, I was struck by how little had changed. Dark wood shelves sagged under the weight of legal tomes, and a grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. The smell of old paper and ink filled the room, grounding me in a kind of seriousness that made my resolve solidify even more. He rose to greet me, his hair whiter now than the last time I'd seen him, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Francis," he said warmly, though his eyes searched mine for answers. "It's been too long." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "Too long, indeed. And I'm afraid I'm not here for a social visit." He folded his hands. "Then tell me what's on your mind." I took a long breath, feeling the cool air rush through the tubes. "My children," I began, my voice steady, though my heart trembled. "They've made it clear what they think of me. They laughed at me, at my oxygen tank, during Christmas dinner. They spoke of inheritance as though I were already in the ground." His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "So," I continued, "I want to make some changes. Quietly. Thoroughly. I want everything set in place before they even know it's begun." Mr. Harper leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. "Changes to the will?" "More than that," I said. My fingers tightened on my handbag. "The house. The accounts. All of it." He nodded slowly. "I'll need specifics." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of papers I'd prepared the night before. "I want the deed transferred into a trust. Not in my children's names, heaven forbid, but in Emily's. She's the only one who stood up for me. And I want a portion of my savings directed to St. Mary's Shelter. Walter and I always meant to give back someday. This will be our way." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Then Mr. Harper asked, "And your children? You're certain about cutting them out entirely?" I looked him straight in the eye. My voice didn't shake. "They've already cut me out. I'm simply returning the favor with paperwork." He began drafting documents, his pen scratching across the pages. "We'll transfer ownership of the house immediately. As for the accounts, we'll close the joint ones today. Any access they've had will be revoked." The thought made me smile, a bitter but satisfying curve of my lips. I imagined Greg waking up to find the debit card he used for his golf trips declined, or my daughter-in-law realizing her spa money had dried up. Mr. Harper paused, adjusting his glasses. "You know this will cause an uproar, Francis. Families rarely take kindly to being disinherited." I let out a short laugh, rough from years of smoke and sorrow. "Good. Let them choke on it." As I signed each document, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My hand, though shaky from age, didn't falter. With every signature, it was as though I were rewriting the story my children had already planned out for me. They wanted me gone, erased, replaced by what they thought they deserved. Instead, I was giving them something far harsher. Nothing. When the last paper was signed, Mr. Harper slid them into a folder and locked it in his drawer. "It's done," he said firmly. I leaned back, feeling lighter than I had in years. The hiss of my oxygen tank no longer sounded like chains. It sounded like victory. Before I left, Mr. Harper looked at me with a softness that almost undid me. "Francis, you're braver than you think. Most people in your situation would have surrendered by now." I shook my head. "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being underestimated." He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of a battle well begun. That evening, back in my small living room, I sat with Emily. She'd come by to bring me dinner, her eyes full of warmth that reminded me there was still good in family, just not in the ones who shared my blood. "Grandma," she said gently, "why are you smiling?" I reached for her hand, squeezing it. "Because, my dear, today I took back what they thought they'd already stolen, and tomorrow I'll take back even more." She didn't press for details. She simply hugged me, her cheek against mine, and whispered, "You're stronger than they'll ever know." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. After the documents were signed and the accounts closed, I knew I couldn't stay in that house much longer. Every room held echoes of my sacrifices. The kitchen, where I had stretched pennies into meals. The hallway, where I hung their school photos. The bedroom where Walter once held me after long days. And now, those same children I raised saw it all as a waiting prize. If I stayed, they'd circle me like vultures. So I decided I would vanish. The first step was subtle. I began packing in silence. Not the dramatic kind of packing with suitcases clattering downstairs. No, this was the kind of packing only a woman who had lived through decades of endurance could do. A little each night. A few clothes, some photo albums, Walter's old watch. Essentials only. I didn't need much. I wasn't running toward luxury, just peace. I kept the oxygen tank strapped by my side as I worked, its hiss reminding me of time slipping by. And each time I folded another sweater into the bag, I whispered to myself, "They won't have the satisfaction of watching me wither." By the end of the week, I had called a moving service. Quiet, discreet. A young man with kind eyes came by one afternoon when my children were too busy to visit, and within 2 hours, the few things I needed were loaded into a small truck. He didn't ask questions when I gave him the address of a coastal town 2 hours away. I left the curtains drawn, the doors locked. Then I unplugged the house phone, turned off my cell, and slid them both into a drawer. My world was mine again. Emily came the night before I left. She had been my confidant through it all, even if I hadn't told her every detail. She walked into the kitchen, her hair falling over her face, her eyes heavy with concern. "Grandma," she said softly, "are you sure about this?" I looked at her, my heart aching with both love and sorrow. "I'm not sure of much anymore, child, but I am sure of this. Staying here will kill me faster than any illness. I need peace, and I need them to learn what it feels like to live without me." She hugged me then, tight enough that I felt the strength of her youth in contrast to my frailty. "I'll come visit, no matter where you are," I smiled, brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. "That's all I need. Just one person who remembers who I am, not what I leave behind." When I finally stepped out the door that night, the air was sharp, biting against my lungs. The street was quiet, blanketed in winter's silence. I looked back once at the house, the place I had fought so hard to keep, the place that had nearly broken me. And then I turned away. The ride to the coast was quiet. The driver didn't make small talk, and I was grateful. I leaned against the window, watching the highway lights streak by, feeling like I was shedding years with each mile. By the time we reached the town, dawn was breaking. Seagulls wheeled above the shoreline, their cries sharp against the waves. I inhaled the salt air, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could truly breathe. I rented a modest cottage, white paint peeling a little, shutters hanging crooked. but it had a view of the ocean that took my breath away. The landlord, an older woman with a voice like gravel, asked no questions. She simply handed me the keys. That first night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sea roll in and out. The hiss of my oxygen tank blended with the rhythm of the tide, and for once, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, back home, the storm had begun. Greg tried to withdraw money for a golf trip and found the account closed. My daughter-in-law tried to pay for a spa day and nearly caused a scene when her card was declined. My daughter, ever the planner, logged into what she thought was our joint account, only to find an empty balance. Panic rippled through them. They called each other, voices sharp and accusing. "Did you take it? Don't look at me. Where's Mom? She's not answering her phone." They drove to my house, pounding on the locked door. No answer. Curtains drawn. Silence. Emily told me later how furious they became, circling each other like jackals, blaming one another for whatever Mum was up to. She stayed quiet, protecting my secret. In my little cottage, I lit a candle and smiled. For the first time in years, I was invisible to them. And yet, I had never felt more alive. I wasn't gone, not yet. But to them, to the ones who laughed at me, dismissed me, reduced me to a tank of air, I was already a ghost. And ghosts, as they would soon discover, can haunt in ways the living never could. It had been nearly 6 weeks since I slipped away to the coast. 6 weeks of salt air, quiet mornings, and evenings where the only sound was the ocean rolling in steady waves. I had begun to heal. Not my lungs. No, those were beyond mending. But my spirit. But back in the town I had left behind, the storm was gathering. Mr. Harper had called my children, summoning them to his office for what they assumed was the inevitable, the reading of my will. They hadn't heard from me in weeks, hadn't seen me, hadn't been able to reach me. In their minds, I was gone. And perhaps, in a way, I was. They arrived that morning dressed in black and grey, as though they were attending a funeral. My son Greg in a dark suit that didn't quite fit his growing belly. My daughter Cynthia, with her lips pursed tight, wearing pearls she hadn't earned. And of course, Greg's wife, heels clicking, face painted with an expression of false grief that would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. Emily was there too, sitting quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. She knew the truth, but she played along, her face composed. Mr. Harper welcomed them into his office. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." Greg sighed loudly. "Let's just get this over with. We all know what's coming." Cynthia smirked. "Yes, let's. Some of us have lives to return." To the arrogance of their words cut through the room like broken glass. They weren't mourning. They were hungry. Mr. Harper opened the folder on his desk. The crackle of paper echoed in the silence. He cleared his throat. "As executor of Frances Whitlow's estate, it is my duty to inform you of her final wishes." Greg leaned back, smirking. Finally. But the smirk didn't last. Mr. Harper began to read, his voice firm and deliberate. "To my children, Greg and Cynthia, and to their spouses, you have been removed as beneficiaries of my estate." The words fell like stones into the room. Greg's face went red. "What?" "That's impossible," Mr. Harper continued, unbothered by the outburst. "The house located at 214 Maple Lane has been transferred into trust, with sole ownership belonging to my granddaughter, Emily Whitlow." Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. "She can't do that." "And," Mr. Harper went on, "a portion of Frances's financial assets have been directed to St. Mary's Shelter in memory of her late husband, Walter Whitlow." Greg slammed his fist onto the desk. "You're lying!" "She would never. She knows we need that money. She knows." Mr. Harper adjusted his glasses calmly. "It's all here. in her signed documents, legal and binding, witnessed, notarized, airtight. The silence that followed was thick with shock. My children sat frozen, their faces twisted in disbelief, their carefully laid plans crumbling around them. And then, just as Mr. Harper was about to close the folder, I stepped into the room. The hiss of my oxygen tank announced me before my voice did. They turned, one by one, their eyes wide. Greg's mouth fell open. Cynthia's face drained of colour. I stood there, frail but upright, with Emily by my side. Surprised? I asked, my voice calm, steady. Greg stammered. Mum? You're alive? I nodded. Alive. More alive than you expected, certainly. Their eyes darted back to Mr. Harper, as though hoping he would undo what they had just heard. But he only folded his hands and leaned back, silent witness to the storm that was about to break. I walked slowly toward the desk, the wheels of the tank rattling softly across the floor. Each step was a statement, each breath a defiance. You laughed at me, I said, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. You mocked the machine that keeps me breathing. You counted the days until you could bury me and collect what you thought was owed to you. Cynthia's lip trembled. We didn't mean it, Mother. I held up my hand, silencing her. You did mean it, and you forgot that I was listening. I heard every cruel word at that Christmas table. I saw the greed in your eyes. I gave you my life, my work, my years, and you gave me nothing but contempt. Greg leaned forward, his voice rising. This isn't fair. We're your children. Children? I let the word hang in the air, bitter and sharp. Children don't laugh at their mother's failing lungs. Children don't circle like wolves, waiting for their mother to die. Number. You may have been my children once, but you chose greed over love. And now, you'll reap the consequences. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. Mr. Harper spoke then, his tone final. Everything Mrs. Whitlow has done is within her rights. This is her decision, and it stands. The room was silent, except for the sound of my breathing, steady and defiant. I turned to leave, my voice carrying one last truth. I may need oxygen to breathe, but I don't need betrayal to live. And with that, Emily and I walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their own expectations. The air outside Mr. Harper's office was cool, crisp, and almost sweet. My lungs still strained with every breath, but each inhale felt like triumph. Emily walked beside me, steadying my arm as we made our way down the steps. Behind us, the muffled sound of raised voices spilled through the office door. Greg shouting, Cynthia crying, my daughter-in-law hissing like a cornered cat. I didn't turn back. I'd spent too many years looking over my shoulder, waiting for gratitude that never came. But their fury didn't end in that office. The very next day, my phone, which I'd left untouched in the drawer, lit up with dozens of missed calls and voicemails. Emily checked them for me, shaking her head as she scrolled. Listen to this one, she said, pressing play. Greg's voice thundered through the speaker. Mum, what the hell have you done? You've ruined us. That house was supposed to be ours, our future. You're not thinking straight. Call me back and fix this. Another message, Cynthia this time, her voice brittle with desperation. Mother, please, this isn't you. People are manipulating you. You're sick. You don't know what you're doing. You can't just cut your own children out like this. And then my daughter-in-law, venom sharp in every syllable. You selfish old woman. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You won't last the year anyway. And when you're gone, Emily will regret siding with you. Emily's jaw tightened as she deleted the message. You don't need to hear this, Grandma. But I smiled faintly. Oh, I do. Every word proves I made the right choice. The days that followed were filled with their attempts to claw back what they believed was theirs. Letters arrived from attorneys, thinly veiled threats that Mr. Harper brushed aside with ease. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he assured me. "The documents are airtight. Let them waste their money on lawyers. It'll only remind them of what they lost. Greg even showed up at the cottage once." Emily was with me, and when we saw his car pull up, her face went pale. "Stay inside," she whispered, but I shook my head. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood there, face red, suit rumpled, looking less like the successful man he pretended to be, and more like a desperate child. "Mum," he said, trying to soften his voice. "Let's talk. We can work this out. Just transfer the house back. You know I can take care of it. You can stay with us. We'll make it comfortable for you." His words dripped with false kindness. I stared at him, my hand steady on the oxygen tank. "Comfortable? The only comfort I need is knowing my life's work isn't wasted on ungrateful hands. You made your choice at Christmas when you laughed at me. I'm only honoring it." He opened his mouth to argue, but Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Leave, Uncle Greg. You don't belong here." His face twisted, but he turned, muttering curses under his breath as he stalked back to his car. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the waves. Emily brought me tea, her presence a balm to my battered heart. "They're never going to forgive you," she said softly, almost as if it were a warning. I looked at her, my eyes catching the reflection of the moonlight. "And I'll never forgive them. We're even." She smiled sadly, but then her expression softened. "I'm proud of you, Grandma. You showed them they can't break you." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Weeks passed, and slowly the noise quieted. The calls stopped. The letters dwindled. It became clear to them that there was no undoing what had been done. Meanwhile, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I planted herbs in a little box outside the cottage window. I learned the rhythm of the tides, the way the sun dipped below the horizon in a wash of gold and purple. Emily visited every weekend, bringing stories from her life, her laughter filling the small rooms with warmth. And though my health didn't improve, my spirit did. One evening, as we sat together watching the sea, Emily asked, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I shook my head slowly. "Not for a moment. They thought I wouldn't last until Christmas. They were right, in a way, because the woman they laughed at is gone. What's left is someone they can't use, can't mock, and can't control." The oxygen tank hissed softly beside me, steady as the tide. I looked out over the waves, my voice low but certain. "And when the end does come, I'll know I left this world on my terms, not theirs." Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, and together we watched the night settle in. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. The sea has a way of teaching lessons. It never stops moving, never waits for anyone. It erases footprints in the sand as if to say, "You cannot linger in the past forever." That's what I've been learning here, in this little cottage by the coast. Life moves forward, even when people try to chain you to their greed. It's been months since the day at Mr. Harper's office. My children haven't spoken to me since. No visits, no apologies, no sudden change of heart, and I've stopped hoping for any. At first, that silence stung. I'd lie awake at night, oxygen hissing, and wonder, did I go too far? Could I have been gentler? But each time I replayed their laughter at the Christmas table, their mocking voices, I knew the answer. They didn't lose my house. They didn't lose my money. They lost me. And truth be told, they never wanted me. They wanted what I carried. Emily visits often, her laughter filling the cottage like sunlight. She brings fresh bread from the bakery, sits with me by the window, and tells me about her dreams. Real dreams, the kind not tied to greed. She once asked, "Do you miss them, Grandma?" I thought long and hard before answering. Finally, I said, "I miss who I thought they were, but I don't miss who they became." She nodded, her young eyes understanding more than I expected. I still use the oxygen tank every day. They thought it was a symbol of weakness, something to mock. But I've come to see it differently. It's a reminder that I'm still here. Every hiss of air is defiance. Every breath is a quiet victory. They said I wouldn't last until Christmas. Yet here I am, watching the gulls wheel above the waves as another spring approaches. I'm not gone. I'm just gone from them. Do I forgive them? Number. Forgiveness is a gift, and they never earned it. What I have is closure. Closure means I no longer wait for their calls. Closure means I can sip my tea in peace, knowing they can't touch a single part of me anymore. Closure means that when I close my eyes at night, I sleep without fear of what will happen to my home, my money, or my dignity. Closure is enough. So to you watching this, maybe you've been laughed at, maybe you've been underestimated, maybe your family or friends have treated you like you don't matter. Let me tell you, you do. You always have. Never let them write your ending for you. Write your own. And now I'll ask, just as I did in the beginning, where are you watching from? Share it with me. Because even if betrayal isolates us, even if family fails us, we can still build new connections. We can still matter to one another. This was my story, not of forgiveness, but of freedom.